I mean, do you get the feeling sometimes we're living in a madhouse? Well, you take these race protests on Saturday, causing all sorts of unexpected trouble, including this example, which I'd laugh about. In fact, I probably am laughing about it if it wasn't actually racist. Millionaire lawyer Julian Burnside, the guy with the white hair on the left, is trying to get the Greens to choose him as their replacement for former Greens leader Richard Di Natale in the Senate. Now, Di Natale is retiring. But now, crikey, that gossip sheet claims that the race protests about George Floyd could kill Burnside's chances, could swing the race for Di Natale's seat in favour of Lydia Thorpe, an activist who identifies as Aboriginal. Now, if that's true, it means that Burnside loses out because he's white. Certainly whiter, well, whiter than Thorpe at any rate. How racist is that? Still, karma can be quite funny, provided it doesn't come for you. Joining me are Rita Panahi, Herald Sun columnist and Sky News host, and Daniel Wild, Director of Research at the Institute of Public Affairs. Rita, our race protests on the weekend have created a lot of anger, a lot of chaos, and a moment of grief for Julian Burnside because he's male and white. Have they caused much good, as far as you can see?
Well, they've been terribly divisive. They've been terribly hyperbolic. So much fake data and fake news being spread and really scaring the bejesus out of people who have got this inflated fear of the police now, when the stats just do not bear that out, whether we're talking about Australia or even America. So I don't see how much good they've done. The new debate seems to be about defunding the police, which is an insane idea, but it is one of the core beliefs of Black Lives Matter movement, and it's now being pushed by celebrities and politicians and academics and all sorts of prominent people. And I think it just shows you the divide between the mainstream and this fringe, which is very loud, very influential, very prominent in the media, political, academic class. But
no,
really,
you
most
call
people...
it a fringe. I've got to look. I'm hoping that you are right, Rita, but you're more optimistic than I am in so many ways. But fringe, I think we're seeing now the bitter fruit of decades of education that's pushed these crazy theories, and now we're seeing people en masse, preaching them. Daniel Wild, these protests now we're reading could be an excuse to wait another week for relaxing these bans, which I think, come on, I would have thought if so many Australians think the bans aren't worth obeying, including 4 Labor politicians, well, the rest of us surely should be given licence too.
Well, I think that's right, Andrew. I've been disappointed with government's using the protests as an excuse to continue the lockdown. I think they've just gone on for too long, and it's been just a prolonged response to something that we were over a long time ago. We had the Department of Health saying, look, under the best case scenario, there'll be 5,000 intensive care units required. That's under the scenario where we do the social distancing, the hygiene, the border closed down. Well, the peak was actually 98, so they were out by a factor of 50. So I think it's been a number of weeks, Andrew, where we could have eased these lockdown restrictions much earlier without the threat of the virus peaking up again. But just in terms of the protests, Andrew, what I think has disappointed a lot of mainstream Australians is that we had the actual political class and the elites. They took the side of the radical left-wing lawless protesters over mainstream Australians. And I think that one of the things I'm concerned about is how people might lose confidence in the rule of law, in our criminal justice system, in law enforcement, if they're saying, well, if there's one group, if there's one set of rules for people doing protests and another set of rules for everybody that wants to get back to work and get on with their lives, then what does that say about our law enforcement, the experts and the politicians?
I think the hypocrisy is jarring with a lot of people, isn't it, Rita? I mean, I saw the Finance Minister, Matthias Cormann, get abused and questioned with hostility on the ABC about having said there was an extremely selfish protest, but I can't help but think he's right. And for the most of the public, they're just choking on the hypocrisy here.
Oh, absolutely. I think these protests in Australia in particular have exposed the enormous divide between mainstream opinion, majority opinion, and the media, because the media coverage of the protests over the weekend, and I'm talking across the board, I'm not talking just about ABC and SBS, commercial networks, was
Channel
glowing. 10. Absolutely. Well, not just across the board. They was absolutely glowing, and there was no questioning of the claims. There was no questioning of the merits of marching during a pandemic. It was all about praise, 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 and that is, I think, a very different attitude to most Australians who've watched their lives and livelihoods be terribly disrupted by these restrictions, and then have people openly flouting rules that were unacceptable 24 hours earlier. It seems, particularly somewhere in Victoria, which has handed out more fines for coronavirus restrictions than any other state, 4 times the amount of fines in New South Wales, and then to pretty much approve of a march where there was not a single fine handed out is just, I think, appalling.
Meanwhile, 2 days later, police, had 20,000, 30,000 people march in the city. A couple of days later, you got police chasing 20 or so fishermen off a pier in Rye. I mean, really. The pulling down of statues, Daniel, in the United States, they're pulling down a statue of Confederate soldiers like General Robert E. Lee. But in Seattle, they've still got a statue of Lenin, the Russian dictator who ordered his agents to kill. He actually set them quotas. He set people quotas to go and kill peasants. Enough peasants, so many in each village to create fear. What are the rules now exactly about which statues can stay and which go? Do you understand them?
No, I certainly don't, Andrew. But the question is not, it's not so much should statues be torn down per se. I mean, we would recognise that certain ones should be. I mean, a lot of people celebrated when, that famous image of Saddam Hussein, that statue being torn down. So the question is what these statues represent good? They're meant, statues are meant to be there for a long time. They're meant to represent enduring values that we want to pass on to the next generation. In Australia, for example, Captain Cook is often targeted by radicals and protesters to tear down. But I would argue, look, Captain Cook is somebody that really embodies excellence and achievement. He accomplished a significant amount in his life. And not only that, but the early settlers and the statesmen that helped set up modern Australia left us with these fantastic institutions, a great way of life, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, rule of law, equality before the law, liberal democratic institutions. Now, these surely these are ideas and institutions we want to pass down to the next generation of Australians. And I can't help but think the protesters that want to tear down those statues also want to tear down everything that we've built up in this country.
Well, I can't help but think there's something to that. But Rita, of course, you can always say that this person, by today's standards, had this unattractive characteristic. But I think that's a level of purity. That's a purity test that I bet you not one of the protesters could pass themselves. Certainly not under the scrutiny of future generations with different standards.
Well, absolutely. And Sadiq Khan, I saw he tweeted out a video today of another statue coming down, this time one that he'd requested, I guess, to come down. It wasn't pulled down by an unruly mob. And I just find this entire mindset of destroying statues so backward and idiotic. Remember when Islamic State went around and smashed up all those statues because they were deemed offensive? I mean, come on, we should be better than that. There should be a process, and if people, the mainstream, the majority, say this image no longer represents our town or this area, then sure, make that decision. But for the mayor just to go and do it, or for some mob to decide, I think it is just crazy. And it won't stop with the slave traders. It won't. It will.
Oh no!
Every single person will be found wanting by modern standards, and even that
except
Lenin
Karl
statue.
Marx, except Karl Marx and that Lenin statue. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
they're okay.
We'll just have those two. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Now, I'll tell you one other thing that's just gone as a result of these race riots. HBO Max has removed from its library Gone with the Wind, because it says, well, that, that shows racial prejudices, even though Gone with the Wind, that's a thing of its time. It's portraying the results, the mores of the time, but apparently it's too inflammatory for anyone to want to see it now. But honestly, we are living in 1984, the George Orwell nightmare.